The laptop screen glowed in the dim study, casting sharp shadows across Michael Carter's face. He wasn't supposed to be here, rifling through his son's private files, but the late-night discovery of a hidden folder labeled Personal had ignited a spark of dread he couldn't extinguish. What he found inside videos of two men, intimate and unapologetic, shattered the image he'd built of his 24-year-old son, Elias. Michael, a 52-year-old mechanic with calloused hands and a guarded heart, leaned back in the creaky chair, his breath uneven. The videos weren't explicit, but they were raw. Stolen glances, soft touches, and laughter shared between Elias and another man whose face Michael couldn't quite make out. His first instinct was anger. How could Elias keep this from him? But beneath that, a deeper unease stirred. The man in the videos felt familiar, like a ghost from a life Michael had buried long ago. It was 2025, and Seattle's autumn air carried a crisp edge as Michael drove home from his auto shop that evening. The city buzzed with its usual mix of tech workers and artists, but Michael's world felt like it was unraveling. Elias had always been his pride. Quiet, thoughtful, with a knack for fixing things, just like his dad. But this was a secret Michael hadn't seen coming. He gripped the steering wheel, replaying the videos in his mind, each frame a question he wasn't ready to answer. Elias, meanwhile, was across town at Volunteer Park, sketching the skyline for his graphic design portfolio. At 24, he was tall and lean, with his mother's warm brown skin and his father's sharp jawline. His dreadlocks were tied back, and his eyes, usually bright, were clouded with worry. He hadn't meant for anyone to find those videos. They were his private refuge, moments with Javier, the 25-year-old barista who'd stolen his heart 6 months ago. Javier, with his quick wit and gentle hands, had made Elias feel seen in a way he'd never known. But coming out to his dad? That was a wall he wasn't ready to climb. Michael's wife, Naomi, was in the kitchen when he got home, her hands kneading dough for her famous cornbread. At 50, Naomi was the heart of their family, her laughter a balm for any storm. But tonight, Michael's silence was a storm she couldn't ignore. "What's wrong, Mike?" she asked, wiping flour from her hands. He hesitated, the weight of his discovery pressing against his chest. "It's Elias," he said finally, his voice low. "I found something on his laptop." Naomi's eyes narrowed, not with judgment but with a mother's instinct. "What kind of something?" she pressed. Michael faltered, unsure how to explain the videos without betraying Elias's trust, or exposing the unease they'd stirred in him. He's been keeping things from us," he said, avoiding her gaze. Naomi's face softened. "He's 24, Mike. He's allowed to have his own life." But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about Elias. The man in the videos, Javier, he'd heard Elias say his name, had a laugh that echoed someone from Michael's past, someone he'd spent decades trying to forget. Back in 1990, when Michael was just 17, he'd known a boy named Daniel. They'd been inseparable, two kids sneaking beers by the Puget Sound, sharing dreams under the stars. Daniel had been the first to make Michael's heart race, but fear and shame had driven Michael to bury those feelings. He'd married Naomi, built a life, and convinced himself Daniel was a mistake. Now, seeing Elias with Javier, those buried feelings clawed their way back. That night, Michael lay awake, Naomi's steady breathing beside him. He couldn't confront Elias, not yet, but the videos had cracked open a door to his own past, and he wasn't sure he could close it again. The next morning, he found Elias in the garage, tinkering with an old carburetor. "Hey, kid," Michael said, his voice tighter than he meant. Elias looked up, his smile fading as he caught his dad's tone. "Something up?" Elias asked, wiping grease from his hands. Michael wanted to ask about the videos, about Javier, about why Elias hadn't trusted him enough to share this part of himself. But the words stuck. Instead, he said, "Just be careful who you let in. All right?" Elias frowned, sensing the weight behind the words but not understanding it. "Sure, Dad," he said, turning back to the carburetor, his heart pounding. Across town, Javier was steaming milk at the Beanery, a cozy coffee shop in Capitol Hill. At 25, Javier was compact and energetic, his dark hair always a little messy, his hazel eyes quick to catch details others missed. He'd grown up in a tight-knit Mexican-American family, but coming out at 18 had cost him their acceptance. He'd built a new family in Seattle's queer community, and meeting Elias had felt like finding a missing piece. But Javier knew Elias wasn't out to his parents, and the secrecy was starting to wear on him. That afternoon, Elias met Javier at the coffee shop, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. "You okay?" Javier asked, sliding a latte across the counter. Elias nodded, but his eyes betrayed him. "Dad's acting weird," he admitted. "Like he knows something." Javier's hand paused mid-wipe on the counter. "You think he found the videos?" he asked, voice low. Elias's stomach twisted. "I don't know. I hope not." The truth was, Michael had found more than just videos. Tucked in that same folder was a letter Elias had written but never sent, addressed to his parents. It was a coming-out letter, raw and heartfelt, explaining how he'd fallen for Javier and how scared he was to disappoint them. Reading it, Michael had felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly knocked him over. He'd raised Elias to be honest, yet here he was, hiding his own truth. As the days passed, Michael's unease grew. He started noticing things, how Elias lit up when he got a text, how he'd linger at the coffee shop longer than necessary. Michael knew he should talk to his son, but every time he tried, memories of Daniel flooded back. Daniel, who'd moved away after high school, leaving Michael with a heart full of what-ifs. Was he angry at Elias for hiding this, or at himself for doing the same all those years ago? One evening, Michael drove to Volunteer Park, hoping to clear his head. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, their petals drifting like soft promises. He sat on a bench, watching couples stroll by, and for the first time, he let himself wonder what his life might have been if he'd been brave enough to love Daniel openly. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Meanwhile, Elias and Javier were at the same park, unaware of Michael nearby. They stood on the wooden bridge, hands intertwined, the sunset painting their faces in gold. "I want to tell them," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But what if they hate me?" Javier squeezed his hand. "They won't. And if they do, you've got me." Elias smiled, but the fear lingered. Back at home, Michael made a decision. He couldn't keep running from his past, and he couldn't let Elias do the same. He pulled out his phone and texted Elias, "We need to talk. Come home." As he hit send, his heart raced, not just for Elias but for the secret he'd kept from his family for over 30 years. Elias stared at his phone, the text from his dad glowing like a warning sign. "We need to talk. Come home." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made his chest tighten. He shoved the phone into his pocket and glanced at Javier, who was sketching a caricature of a passing dog walker on a napkin. "I gotta go," Elias said, his voice clipped. Javier looked up, concern creasing his brow. "Everything okay?" Elias forced a smile. "Yeah, just family stuff." The drive back to his parents' house in West Seattle felt endless. The city's skyline glittered against the twilight, but Elias barely noticed. His mind raced with possibilities. Had his dad found the videos? The letter? Or was this about something else entirely? By the time he pulled into the driveway, his palms were sweaty, and his heart was a drumbeat in his ears. Michael was in the living room, sitting in his old recliner, a glass of whiskey untouched on the side table. Naomi was upstairs, giving them space, though she'd made Michael promise to tread lightly. When Elias walked in, Michael gestured to the couch. "Sit," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. Elias obeyed, his sketchbook still clutched in his hands like a shield. "I found some things on your laptop," Michael began, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. Elias froze, his breath catching. "It wasn't on purpose. I was trying to fix that virus you mentioned, and there was a folder." Elias's face burned, a mix of shame and defiance rising in his chest. "You went through my stuff?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Michael held up a hand. "I know I shouldn't have, but I saw the videos, Elias. You and him." The word him hung in the air, heavy with unspoken questions. Elias's first instinct was to run, to grab his keys and bolt, but something in his dad's eyes, something raw and unguarded, kept him rooted to the couch. "His name's Javier," Elias said quietly, testing the waters. Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "Javier," he repeated, as if trying the name on for size. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Michael spoke again. "Why didn't you tell us?" Elias's throat tightened. "I didn't know how. You and Mom, you're so traditional. I thought you'd be ashamed." The words spilled out, raw and unfiltered, and Michael flinched as if struck. "Ashamed?" he echoed, his voice breaking. "Elias, you're my son. I could never be ashamed of you." But Elias wasn't convinced. He'd grown up hearing his dad's offhand comments about those kinds of people, the ones Michael claimed took things too far. He'd seen the way his dad changed the channel when a gay couple appeared on TV. "Then why do you act like it's wrong?" Elias challenged, his voice rising. "Every time something comes up, you shut it down. How was I supposed to tell you I'm gay?" The word landed like a thunderclap. Michael's hands clenched, not in anger but in a desperate attempt to hold himself together. He wanted to say he didn't think it was wrong, not anymore, but the truth was more complicated. His discomfort wasn't about Elias. It was about the mirror Elias's truth held up to his own life. "I'm trying to understand," Michael said finally, "but you gotta give me time." Elias shook his head, standing up. "Time? Dad, I've been hiding this for years. I'm tired of waiting for you to be okay with it." He grabbed his sketchbook and headed for the door, but Michael's voice stopped him. "There's something else," Michael said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "I read your letter, the one you didn't send." Elias turned, his eyes wide with panic. The letter was his heart laid bare. Every fear, every hope, every moment of falling in love with Javier. "You had no right," he whispered, but Michael pressed on. "You wrote about being scared we wouldn't accept you, but you also wrote about him, Javier, making you feel like you could be yourself. I need to know, is he good to you?" The question caught Elias off guard. He'd expected anger, maybe disappointment, but not this. "Yeah," he said, his voice softening. He's everything." Michael nodded, his eyes distant. "Good. That's what matters." But there was something in his dad's expression, something Elias couldn't place, that made him pause. "What aren't you telling me?" Elias asked. Michael hesitated, the weight of 30 years pressing down on him. He could tell Elias about Daniel, about the boy who'd once made his heart race, but the words felt too heavy, too dangerous. Instead, he said, "Just don't hide from us anymore. Okay? We're family." Elias didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said he wasn't ready to trust that promise. The next day, Elias met Javier at the beanery, his nerves still raw from the confrontation. Javier was wiping down tables, his apron streaked with coffee stains. "So, what happened?" he asked, leaning against the counter. Elias recounted the conversation, his voice low to avoid the curious ears of nearby customers. "He knows about us," Elias said, "and he read my letter. I don't know what to do." Javier reached across the counter, his hand brushing Elias's. "You told him the truth. That's a start. But you don't have to do this alone." Elias wanted to believe him, but the fear of losing his family gnawed at him. "What if they never accept it?" he asked. Javier's eyes softened. "Then we make our own family. But give them a chance, Eli. They might surprise you." Back at home, Michael was grappling with his own truths. He sat in the garage, surrounded by tools and the faint smell of motor oil, staring at an old photo he dug out from a box. It was him and Daniel, 17 and fearless, laughing by the waterfront. Naomi found him there, her presence a quiet anchor. "You've been off lately," she said, sitting beside him. "Talk to me." Michael handed her the photo, his hands trembling. "This is Daniel," he said, his voice barely audible. "We were close, back in high school." Naomi studied the photo, her eyes sharp but kind. "Close how?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Michael took a deep breath, the words he'd buried for decades finally breaking free. "I loved him, Naomi, and I never told anyone." Naomi's hand found his, her grip steady. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, not accusing but curious. Michael shook his head. "I was scared. Of what it meant, of what people would think. I thought marrying you, building this life, it would make it go away." Naomi's eyes held his, unflinching. "Did it?" Michael's silence was answer enough. They sat there, the weight of his confession settling between them. Naomi squeezed his hand. "You're not that kid anymore, Mike, but Elias is. Don't let your fear stop him from living his truth." Her words hit hard, and for the first time Michael saw a path forward, not just for Elias, but for himself. Michael woke the next morning with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. His confession to Naomi had lifted a weight, but it also left him raw, like a wound exposed to air. He knew he owed Elias more than vague promises of acceptance. He needed to show it. But how do you bridge a gap built on years of silence and assumptions? Elias, meanwhile, was at his apartment in Capitol Hill, staring at his laptop. The folder with the videos was still open, a reminder of the trust he'd lost. He wanted to delete them, to erase the evidence of his vulnerability, but they were also proof of his love for Javier, proof he wasn't ready to let go. His phone buzzed with a text from his mom. "Dinner tonight. Just us three. Please come." Elias hesitated, then typed back, "Okay." At the coffee shop, Javier was training a new barista, his usual charm tempered by worry for Elias. During a lull, he called his older sister, Sophia, who lived in Portland. Sophia had been his rock when their parents cut him off after he came out. "He's scared, Soph," Javier said, leaning against the back wall of the beanery. "His dad knows, and it's messing with him." Sophia's voice was steady on the other end. "Give him time, Javi, and be there when he's ready to fight for this." That evening, the Carter house smelled of Naomi's lasagna, a dish she reserved for big moments. Elias arrived, his sketchbook left in the car, his guard up. Michael was setting the table, his movements deliberate, like he was handling something fragile. Naomi broke the tension with a warm hug, pulling Elias close. "Missed you, baby," she said, her voice a lifeline. Dinner started quietly, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. Then Michael cleared his throat. "Elias, I owe you an apology," he said, his eyes meeting his son's. "I shouldn't have gone through your things, and I haven't been open about a lot." Elias's fork paused midair, his heart racing. Naomi watched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I was wrong to make you feel like you couldn't tell us who you are," Michael continued. "I've got my own stuff to work through, but that's not on you. I want you to know I'm proud of you. Always have been." Elias's eyes stung, but he held back the tears. "You say that now," he said, his voice low. "But what happens when you meet Javier? When it's real?" Michael nodded, as if he'd been waiting for the question. "I'd like to meet him," he said simply. "If he's important to you, he's important to us." Elias blinked, caught off guard. Naomi reached for his hand. "We love you, Elias. All of you." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Elias's chest ache. He wanted to believe them, but years of hiding had left scars. After dinner, Elias drove to Javier's apartment, needing to share what had happened. Javier was sprawled on his couch, a half-finished painting of the Seattle skyline on an easel nearby. "They want to meet you," Elias said, collapsing beside him. Javier's eyebrows shot up. "For real?" Elias nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready, but they're trying." Javier pulled Elias close, his warmth a steady anchor. "That's more than I got from my folks," he said, his voice tinged with old pain. "You've got a shot, Eli. Take it." They sat there, the city's hum filtering through the open window, and for the first time, Elias felt a flicker of hope. Back at the Carter house, Michael and Naomi were cleaning up, the silence between them softer now. "You did good tonight," Naomi said, drying a plate. Michael shrugged, but his eyes were distant. "I meant it about meeting Javier, but there's something else I need to do." Naomi tilted her head, waiting. "I need to find Daniel," Michael said, his voice barely audible. "I need to make peace with that part of me." Naomi set the plate down, her expression unreadable. "You sure you're ready for that?" she asked. Michael wasn't sure, but the idea of living another day with that secret felt unbearable. "I have to be," he said, "for Elias, for us." The next day, Michael started his search. Daniel had moved to San Francisco after high school, but beyond that, Michael had no leads. He scoured old yearbooks, social media, anything that might point to where Daniel was now. Each dead end felt like a rejection, but he kept going, driven by a need to confront the past he'd run from. Elias, meanwhile, was preparing for Javier to meet his parents. He and Javier spent the day at Volunteer Park, planning how to navigate the dinner. "What if they ask about my family?" Javier said, tossing a pebble into the pond. "I don't want to lie, but it's heavy." Elias took his hand. "Then tell the truth. They're not perfect, but they're trying. That's gotta count for something." As the dinner approached, Michael found a lead on Daniel, a LinkedIn profile that matched his age and hometown. His heart raced as he sent a message, unsure if Daniel would even remember him. "Hey, it's Michael Carter. Been a long time. Can we talk?" He hit send, his hands shaking, and waited. The night of the dinner arrived, and the Carter house was alive with nervous energy. Naomi had outdone herself with a spread of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and her famous cornbread. Elias and Javier arrived together, Javier in a crisp button-down, his usual confidence tempered by nerves. Michael opened the door, his smile genuine but strained. "You must be Javier," he said, extending a hand. Javier shook it, his grip firm. "Good to meet you, Mr. Carter." The dinner was awkward at first, with small talk about Javier's job and Elias's art. But as the night went on, the conversation deepened. Javier shared stories of his life in Capitol Hill, his love for painting, and the community that had become his family. Michael listened, seeing echoes of Daniel in Javier's easy laugh and quiet strength. Naomi, ever the peacemaker, kept the mood light, but her eyes never left Michael, watching for cracks. As dessert was served, Elias took a deep breath. "I need to say something," he said, his voice steady. "Javier and I were serious. I love him, and I need you to be okay with that." The table went quiet, the weight of his words settling over them. Michael met his son's gaze, seeing the boy he'd raised and the man he was becoming. "We're more than okay," he said, his voice thick. "We're family." The dinner marked a turning point, but the road ahead wasn't smooth. Elias felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted, but doubts lingered. His parents' acceptance felt real, but he couldn't shake the fear that it was fragile, a promise that could crack under pressure. Javier, too, was cautious, his past teaching him that love from family could come with conditions. Michael, meanwhile, was wrestling with his own demons. Daniel had responded to his message, a simple "It's been a while, Mike. I'm in Seattle next week. Coffee?" The words were casual, but they hit Michael like a freight train. He hadn't seen Daniel in over 30 years, and the idea of facing him now, after everything, felt like stepping into a minefield. He told Naomi about the message, expecting her to push back, but she just nodded. "You need this," she said. "Not just for you but for Elias. Show him what it looks like to be brave." The coffee shop meeting was set for a small place in Fremont, far enough from home to feel safe. Michael arrived early, his hands fidgeting with a napkin as he waited. When Daniel walked in, Michael's breath caught. At 52, Daniel was still striking tall, with silver streaks in his dark hair and the same warm eyes that had haunted Michael's dreams. "Mike," Daniel said, his smile cautious but genuine. "You look good." They talked for hours, the years melting away as they caught up. Daniel was a photographer now, living in San Francisco with his partner of 10 years. He spoke openly about his life, his struggles, his joys. Michael listened, his heart aching for the life he might have had. "Why'd you reach out?" Daniel asked finally, his voice gentle. Michael hesitated, then told him about Elias, about the videos, about the secret he'd kept even from himself. "I loved you back then," Michael admitted, the words spilling out like a dam breaking, "and I was too scared to do anything about it." Seeing Elias with Javier, it brought it all back. Daniel's eyes softened. "I loved you too, Mike, but we were kids. We didn't know how to fight for it." They sat in silence, the weight of their shared past settling between them. "You've got a chance now," Daniel said, "with your son. Don't waste it." Back at home, Elias and Javier were navigating their own challenges. Javier had invited Elias to a queer art showcase in Capitol Hill, a chance to share his sketches with a wider audience. Elias was nervous, not just about his art but about being openly gay in a public space. "What if someone from my old life shows up?" he asked Javier, his voice tight. Javier grinned. "Then they'll see you shining, and they'll see me right beside you." The showcase was a vibrant mix of colors and voices, with drag queens mingling with poets and painters. Elias's sketches, portraits of Javier, of the city, of moments stolen in quiet corners, drew a small crowd. For the first time, Elias felt like he belonged, not just to Javier but to a community that saw him for who he was. Javier's hand in his felt like a promise, one he was starting to believe in. Michael, inspired by his talk with Daniel, decided to take a step forward. He invited Elias and Javier to the auto shop, a place that had always been his sanctuary. "I want you to know this is your home too," he told Javier, handing him a wrench. "You're part of this family now." Javier, usually quick with a joke, was quiet, his eyes bright with emotion. "Thanks, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice thick. But the harmony was short-lived. A week later, Elias got a call from his cousin, Marcus, who'd heard rumors about the dinner. Marcus, a 30-year-old mechanic who worked with Michael, was less than accepting. "You're bringing that guy around the shop?" he asked, his tone sharp. "What's next? Pride flags in the garage?" Elias's stomach dropped. He'd known not everyone would be on board, but hearing it from family stung. Elias told Javier about the call, expecting him to brush it off, but Javier's face hardened. "I've dealt with this before," he said. "My own family said worse. But you need to decide, Eli. Are you in this with me? Or are you going to let people like Marcus pull us apart?" The question hit Elias hard. He loved Javier, but the fear of losing his family, of losing the life he'd known, was a shadow he couldn't shake. Michael, overhearing the conversation, stepped in. "Marcus doesn't speak for me," he said, his voice firm, "and he doesn't get to decide who's welcome here." Elias looked at his dad, seeing a strength he hadn't noticed before. "You really mean that?" he asked. Michael nodded. "I've spent too long hiding from who I am. I'm not gonna let you do the same." That night, Michael sat down with Naomi and told her about Daniel. Not just the coffee shop meeting, but the love he'd felt, the fear that had driven him away, the regret that had lingered. Naomi listened, her eyes steady but soft. "I'm glad you told me," she said, "but I need to know. Are you still in love with him?" Michael shook his head. "No, I love you, but I needed to face that part of me to be the husband and father I want to be." Naomi took his hand, her grip a quiet promise. "Then let's do this together," she said. "For Elias. For us." Michael felt a weight lift, not just from his past but from the future he was building with his family. The final pieces of the Carter family's puzzle fell into place slowly, with effort and grace. Elias and Javier's relationship grew stronger, rooted in the public acknowledgement of their love. The art showcase had been a turning point for Elias, not just as an artist but as a man who no longer hid. His sketches were picked up by a local gallery, and Javier's paintings hung beside them, a testament to their shared journey. Michael took his own steps toward healing. He and Daniel stayed in touch, not as lovers but as friends who'd found a way to honor their past without letting it define them. Daniel's partner, Leo, even joined them for coffee one day, and Michael found himself laughing in a way he hadn't in years. The guilt he'd carried for decades was fading, replaced by a quiet pride in the life he'd built and the son he was learning to know. Marcus, however, remained a challenge. He showed up at the auto shop one morning, his arms crossed, his face set. "You're really okay with this?" he asked Michael, gesturing toward a photo of Elias and Javier that Naomi had framed and hung in the office. Michael met his cousin's gaze, unflinching. "Yeah, I am. And if you can't handle it, that's your problem, not theirs." Marcus didn't back down easily, but Michael's resolve was unshakable. Over time, Marcus's comments grew less frequent, softened by the reality of Elias and Javier's presence in the family. Naomi, ever the diplomat, invited Marcus to dinner, where Javier's charm and Elias's quiet strength began to chip away at his walls. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One spring evening, the Carters hosted a barbecue in their backyard. The air filled with the scent of grilled corn and Naomi's cornbread. Elias and Javier arrived hand in hand, their laughter mingling with the chatter of neighbors and friends. Michael watched them, his heart full. He'd spent so long fearing what it meant to love openly, but seeing Elias with Javier, seeing the way they grounded each other, made it clear. Love wasn't a secret to be buried. It was a truth to be lived. As the sun set, Michael pulled Elias aside. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice steady. "Not just for being you, but for being braver than I ever was." Elias's eyes glistened, but he smiled. "You're doing okay, Dad," he said, pulling Michael into a hug. Nearby, Javier caught Naomi's eye and winked, a silent thank you for her unwavering support. The barbecue stretched into the night, with music and stories flowing freely. Michael found himself next to Naomi, her hand in his, their love a quiet anchor amid the chaos. He thought of Daniel, of the boy he'd been, and realized he no longer regretted the path he'd chosen. It had led him here, to a family that was messy, imperfect, and whole. Elias and Javier stood by the fire pit, their faces lit by the flames. Elias leaned in, whispering something that made Javier laugh, a sound that carried across the yard. Michael watched them, knowing their journey wouldn't be easy, but also knowing they wouldn't face it alone. He'd uncovered a secret, not just in Elias's laptop but in his own heart, and in doing so, he'd found a way to love his son and himself without fear. The stars above Seattle twinkled, a reminder that some truths, once hidden, could light up the world. And as the night wound down, the Carter family stood together, not perfect, but united in a love that had weathered secrets and emerged stronger for it.